All right. I believe we are live. Mags and Slabs. Let's go. All right, everybody. What's up? I'm Brad from Sports Magazines and History. Welcome to another podcast episode of Mags and Slabs. I have with me my friend Mike from Slabs to Men. Mike, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. How's everyone doing?
We are glad to have you guys watching. We're going live right now, so any of you who join us, feel free to hop in the chat, comment along, add some questions. We'll do our best to answer questions, and yeah, we got another round of different topics to discuss this evening. So, with that being said, Mike, you want to go ahead and have us jump into topic number one?
Slabs on heritage auctions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I'm
I don't know
gonna
if bring that up. We could take a look at some of these.
Yeah, so there were a few that recently sold on Heritage that I thought warranted a little bit of discussion, and then there also were several that are coming up here in the near future that I thought warranted some discussion as well. So I'm going to start with some of these that recently sold, and let's see, I think that's what I've got pulled up right here. It is. So one of the first ones that kind of caught my eye and I thought was worth talking about is, oh no, these are the upcoming ones. Let's see. Here's the ones that recently sold. Yeah, sorry about that. There was a Michael Jordan Last Stand. Okay, so this 9.6 right here, I thought was a little bit interesting, Mike, mainly because there was a 9.8 copy of this issue. This is the Michael Jordan The Last Stand from 1998. Of course, we now think of it more as The Last Dance because of the big documentary, but Sports Illustrated went with The Last Stand. And that 9.8 sold on Heritage maybe 2 months ago, I think, for $8,000, somewhere in the ballpark of $8,000. So I thought it was really interesting to see this 9.6 sell for $336. And I've got a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, first off, it definitely, if anything, goes to show you just how big of a jump in value that the 9.8 makes versus the 9.6.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be a premium for, the top of the line and the most pristine versions of collectibles that you can find. That's true across all collectibles, but this was a huge multiplier.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, the difference stood out to me from the 9.8 to the 9.6. I think another factor is, I've talked before about when there's a first to market. I think that makes a big difference. And when you've got The Last Stand, which this is a, Michael Jordan, pretty significant issue. And when you've got a 9.8, and it's, to my knowledge, it was the first 9.8 of that issue to go to into a public sale. I think that really draws a lot more interest. And then once that very first one has sold, the immediate interest and maybe the number of eyes and the number of bidders drops off a little bit. So I also kind of wonder if that played a factor on this one too. There was a Kobe 9.8 right here. This one was definitely interesting to me because in August of 2022, and I only remember that because that was one of the biggest months that we had with graded magazines. There was a big round of huge covers that sold on Heritage that month. A Kobe first cover, a Trout first cover, a LeBron first cover, all 9.8s, and then there was a high-end Mickey Mantle first cover as well. But I remember that month, August of 2022, a Kobe Bryant 9.8 first cover, this exact one that we're looking at here, sold once again in the ballpark of $8,000, if I'm not mistaken. So looking
Yeah.
here, from what just a few days ago went for 1,560. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I mean, some of these more modern ones, kind of like cards, I think are proving to be a little bit, the supply and demand factor is starting to come into play here, and it's also, people are, I think, looking at some of these more modern ones, thinking that maybe they'll be able to find it raw and take a shot at it themselves.
No, I definitely agree with that. I feel like, I mean, I feel like once again, I think first to market played a factor here with that first one going for 8,000. I think that a big factor right now with these high end slabs is there's just not a huge number of high end buyers. I think there are a lot of people that are interested right now in being low end buyers. Like you said, a lot of people are interested in finding some of these good deals and good steals raw. But as far as people who are willing and able to shell out, 5, 10, whatever more grand, I don't think there's a lot. I think we actually, you and I, because we're in this circle and we're in some of these groups, we know a handful who have been some of those buyers, but I just don't think yet that there's been a lot of people in that echelon or in that realm who are capable of spending those big bucks on the highest end issues that are out there.
Yeah, and this hobby might be getting um, some visibility at kind of the wrong time, so to speak. The collectibles market in general is just very soft, has been for a while. And with, interest, coming at a time when people aren't putting money towards collectibles like they were a couple of years ago, it's just kind of a funky time to kind of get it rolling. Where, cards 2 years ago were bringing all sorts of new money.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that the market being down and the interest in collectibles in general being down is playing a big factor too. We know that comics are way down right now. We know that sports cards are way down right now. And so, even though we've seen some pretty big booms here, even in recent months with the sports magazines, even when those other collectibles have been down, doesn't surprise me at all to see some softening in the sports magazine market as well. And I definitely feel like I'm seeing some softening in a lot of the high end issues. And once again, it's like if a high end, high grade issue hits the market that maybe one of these handful of top dogs already owns, then we're going to see a big price drop. Um, that just that just kind of seems to be that's what it looks like to me right now. Another recent sale that I thought was interesting and worth mentioning is this Mike Trout, and this one's more of a positive in my mind. This is a blank box subscription, 9.8, that went for 2,400, and once again, the 9.8 Mike Trout newsstand sold over a year ago. Again, I think it was in the $8,000 range, somewhere around there. But a blank box subscription, 9.8, going for 2,400. To me, that's a pretty strong sale, and that's a pretty strong indicator of something we've hinted at before, that there does seem to be a market for the blank box subscriptions as opposed to a traditional subscription.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, at least with modern issues, it kind of gets broken down into three categories almost: newsstand, white box, and pure subscription, with label. Yeah, I mean, obviously visually it makes a big difference. But that being said, even in number count, I wonder what percentage of them of the subscriptions are actually white box.
That's what I was about to say because, we know that one of the reasons the subscriptions are not as desirable is, obviously the look is a little bit of a factor, but, with someone's address on there, but the scarcity is probably the biggest factor. We know that with the subscription copies, there's lots and lots. But like you just insinuated, I don't think that the numbers are real high on the blank box subscriptions. I have no idea, and I don't even really want to speculate on what percentage, but I don't feel like I see a ton of blank box subscription copies out there.
Right, and if theoretically they're only for the small percentage of subscribers that were at that month about to renew for the year, I mean that has to be a pretty small percentage in general.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could almost make somewhat of a very rough guess that,
Right.
if Sports Illustrated was a weekly publication at the time, and just making a blanket assumption that of all 52 weeks in a year, they had the same, about the same number of subscribers that were up each week, then maybe it's one
One
52nd.
second. Exactly. I
You
was
know,
thinking the same thing.
that's a
Yeah.
very very rough estimate. I'm sure it doesn't quite work that way. I mean, you probably got a lot more new subscribers like around Christmas or January, but still, it's fun to think about. It may be something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's true. It's pretty small.
yeah, yeah. So those were just a handful of some recent sales that I thought were worth mentioning, and then there's definitely a few upcoming slabs that I wanted to touch base on, and the biggest one. So let's see, where am I at here? Okay, we spent a lot of time talking, and there was a lot of buzz about the Michael Jordan "A Star Is Born" 9.8 that sold for, what was it, 126,000 or something like that,
Yeah.
several months back. That generated a lot of buzz. I have not heard any talk about how there is currently a 9.6
Right.
of that issue up on Heritage right now. It's got an estimate of 60,000 and up, which seems reasonable if the 9.8 is going for 126 grand. That's less than 50% of the value for the 9.6. Current bid right now is at 16,000. There's still 8 days to go. What are your thoughts on this one?
That this is a steal. You know, if you think that there's some promise in this hobby long term, this is a great find right here. It's beautiful.
And I was trying to see. I think if I recall correctly, there were three 9.8s. Do you have any idea? Have you looked how many 9.6s there are?
No, we can take a look.
Okay, because I haven't looked either. I was hoping that it was maybe listed here on the description.
Right. I'll take a look for you.
Yeah, let me know what you find. But I think with the 9.8 that went for 126. Do you remember? I mean, obviously, we know a lot of times the biggest jumps in bidding happen there at the very end.
That's true.
I want to say that 9.8 was sitting around 50,000,
Yep.
like up until the very end, wasn't it?
Yep. Yeah,
So
it did a lot of damage on that in the last moments.
so it jumped from 50,000 to 126. So I mean, if this one's at 16 right now, I just wonder if there's going to be a big jump here at the end, and if we end up seeing a much higher number.
Somebody pointed out this slab has like some sort of smudge mark on, I think it's just on the slab, right on the front, which is a little distracting, I guess, but I believe it's on the slab.
Oh, I see that.
Yeah.
Huh.
So as for pop counts, three 9.8s exist, four 9.6s.
Okay. So still very low.
Super low. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that'll be really interesting to see what that one looks like once that sale goes final. Another one that I thought was really interesting and worth mentioning is this one's valued at 20,000, and this is a Bobby Orr first cover newsstand highest graded copy at a 9.0.
Hmm.
Now, bidding has not opened on this one yet. Bidding will open December 1st, so we're still a ways away on this one. This one just got listed very recently. But, I mean, for hockey fans, a highest graded copy of Bobby Orr has to be pretty high up there on the wish list.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting to see if that realizes anything close to the 20,000 estimate. Another one. Oh, okay. So we just talked about this Last Stand issue, and how a 9.8 went a couple months ago for 8,000. Well, here we go. We got another one, another 9.8, exact same copy or exact same issue, going up for bid starting December 1st. I will be very, very interested to see if that one comes anywhere in the ballpark of the 8,000 that the other one hit.
And is that June 8th, 98? Is that?
That is, yes, June 8th, 98.
So that's a 9, and a 9.8, that's a pop 6. And a
Okay.
9.6, it's a pop 13.
Okay.
It's a pop 53 overall.
So, I mean, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Brad.
Well, I definitely think that when you get to those 90s issues of Jordan, that's kind of like peak collectible, like as far as in the moment, I feel like that's kind of the peak of what people were actually saving and holding on to.
Yeah, that's true.
It hasn't always been first instinct for people to just save Sports Illustrated, but if there's two kind of eras or athletes that jump out to me as, okay, everyone was saving these. It's
Yeah.
the late 90s Jordans, the 96 and on, it seems like the last three-peat with the Bulls, all those covers he was on, those are very, very common, I feel like. And then also I feel that way about the home run chase with all those McGuire issues. Obviously now those are kind of
Those didn't age that well. Yeah.
did not age well at all, but at the time it was monstrous, it was huge, it was all the rage, and it was also kind of still very near Sports Illustrated's peak in terms of circulation. So I do feel like there's a little bit of, I don't want to say saturation, but you just see a lot more newsstand copies of some of those like 90s Jordans than you do some of the other big issues.
Yeah.
Two other ones I wanted to touch on that are coming up. There's a Michael Jordan first cover that is a subscription, 9.2. They've got the value listed at 10,000. There are 8 days left in the bidding, and it looks like there has not been the starting bid is 2,500, and there's not been a bid. So I do think that Heritage was a little optimistic with the value estimate there, with it being a subscription, but that's another one where I'll be very interested to see what happens, because a 9.2 is
That's a strong grade.
very strong grade, yeah. All right, and then the last one is there's a LeBron first cover autographed. So it's got the green label, and it's an 8.0. And this one's interesting to me. So they've got the estimate at 5,000, and there is a current bid right now of 1,400. And this is another one with 8 days left to go. So this is very interesting to me for this reason. We've talked before, Mike, a lot about autographs, and I'm kind of the belief that autographed newsstand copies of key first covers is a huge area with potential growth in value and appreciation. Because just the reason I feel that way is we already know how rare a lot of these copies are just in newsstands alone. And so when you take one of these newsstands that's incredibly rare, and then you get an authenticated signature on top of it with some of these athletes that can be really hard to get autographs from, to me that just exponentially kind of increases the potential value and the collectability of it. So the reason this catches my eye is an 8.0 LeBron James first cover that's not autographed. That's selling on eBay right now for a couple $100, maybe $300.
Right.
The fact that we've already got a bid at 1,400 and there's no difference on this except that it's got an autograph, that's saying that, wow, LeBron's autograph on this particular issue is adding over $1,000 of value.
Is
And
this one authenticated by anybody?
that's a great question. It's hard to tell because CGC never recognizes them.
I mean, it would be great for them to say. I mean, I know that they're not going to say yes, this is authentic.
Here you go,
It's
but
maybe
Heritage
okay.
does.
There we
Heritage
go.
does say it's
Okay,
PSA.
but I wish in the slab it would say. I mean, at least say there's a PSA DNA sticker, or this. Have some sort of connection to the fact that it has been authenticated by anybody.
I agree.
Why not? Why not say that? I don't know why that's such a big deal.
We gotta get there. We gotta get to some place with CGC where it's better recognized than it is now because it's so frustrating the way it is now. I'm sitting on a big box of autographed issues that I just absolutely will not send to CGC until they have a better way of denoting their signed issues.
Would Do you have any interest in having your issues PSA DNA authenticated and then slabbed up, otherwise? I've
Not
thought
not under the current system, I don't, because even if it's PSA authenticated, I don't want it to then be slabbed and then just have it right there on the top label just say, oh, LeBron James written on the cover, qualified grade.
yeah, no, that's such a dismissive, almost disrespectful way of putting it on their label.
Yeah, it really is. I hate that. So if
That I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, you go.
That Michael Jordan first cover subscription 9.2, it's not just a high grade, it's the highest grade.
Oh, for subscriptions.
It's one of two.
Wow.
And we've seen Mickey Mantle first cover subscriptions in high grade go for huge money.
Yeah.
This is a special issue too. It's one of, I think most would agree, one of the top few, the top collectible issues.
Oh, easily.
So, yeah, even as a subscription, maybe if it was a cleanly, label removed, it would really show, even more promise. But I wouldn't be surprised if this gets some big jumps, near the end there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the market has definitely shown that a label cleanly removed, it has to be clean, with very little trace. You can't have any paper tear or color loss, but a cleanly removed subscription copy seems to be selling better than a copy such as this where that sticker is still fully attached.
It's the vintage equivalent to a white box.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
True. So yeah, we'll see what
Actually,
happens.
but a little more dangerous.
Yeah, you
Wow,
gotta you
wow,
gotta you gotta know what you're doing. I'm gonna give a shout out to my guy Doug Fortuna because
Yeah.
the couple times that I've had labels removed, and Mike, I know you've done it a few as well. I
Yeah.
send them to him, and they've come out beautifully. He says he's been doing it for 25 years, and you scroll through eBay, you see a lot of really ugly label removals, but he does it really clean. Now, I've never seen one that's taken off so well that there's zero way of detecting it. Usually, there's going to at least be some glue strips or a rough feel or something, but Doug gets pretty dang close. And my recommendation is if you have a vintage key cover and subscription that's potential for high grade, send it to someone like Doug and pay him to have that label cleanly removed, and then you've got a beautiful display. You can get that graded, and you could probably do pretty well if you're looking to flip it.
Yep, absolutely right.
Okay. So yeah, that's all I had for the heritage items. I just thought there were some relevant ones that we really needed to touch on.
Yep.
All right. Let's move to topic number 2. So this was one that I felt like needed a deep dive because there's a group chat I'm in, a group message that I'm in, and some people were sharing how a copy of the first Sports Illustrated issue recently sold as a 9.8 for under $2,000. It was like maybe $1,800, something like that. And so that was generating some discussion about that very first issue. And hey, that seems, some of them were saying that seemed like a really low price. What's going on? Why is this iconic issue at a 9.8 from 1954 selling for less than $2,000? And so it got me to thinking, you know what? That first issue, there's so much going on with it. There are so many nuances that probably it would be worth our time to take a little bit of a deeper look on it. So here's the issue that we're talking about. If you're not familiar, the premier issue of Sports Illustrated. This is from August 16th, 1954. We've got Eddie Matthews on the cover, Hall of Famer for the Braves. And Mike, talk a little bit about Eddie Matthews, because you and I were chatting before we went live here about his career and how he's maybe now a little bit underrated in terms of how good of a player he actually was.
Yeah. He seems to kind of get lost in the mix historically a little bit. I mean, Hank Aaron is very, obviously Hank Aaron was the all-time home run leader, up until Barry Bonds broke that, and his statistics are a little bit more flashy overall than Eddie Matthews. But in the 50s, which was kind of sort of like a golden age for baseball in a lot of ways. But in the 50s, Eddie Matthews was right there with Hank Aaron, as far as the Braves were concerned. And he was a big deal. He was a big deal player in the 50s. He is a early member of the 500 Home Run Club. And at the time that he did it in the late 60s, it was a very, very select group. I want to bring up his statistics here so I can talk a little bit better to him. I think you said that earlier, that he finished in MVP voting twice, second in MVP voting twice. He was third Rookie of the Year. He was multi-time All-Star, 12-time All-Star, 2 times World Series champion. So he was just a really great hitter. I don't think that there's not a lot of like memorable things that people can kind of call on, where Hank Aaron and other players like him, there's like these moments, and moments in sports really go a long way. Michael Jordan has a plethora of moments that we can just always recall, and it just like builds up, the mystique. People like Bo Jackson have these moments. Then, Eddie Matthews, I can't think of any real moments. He was just a solid player. Being on the cover of Sports Illustrated might be one of his big moments, historically.
No, that's a really good point. That may be why. I mean, even someone like, Reggie Jackson, we've got the Mr. October and the 3 home runs in the World Series game. And, I mean, when I think of Eddie Matthews, I don't know of any huge moments that stick out with him. I mean, really the only thing that, other than the Sports Illustrated cover, the only thing that comes to mind for me with Eddie Matthews is, he was in the 500 home run club. I know he did that, but yeah, it seems like that definitely could be a reason why he's forgotten. But how fortunate are we as sports fans and Sports Illustrated fans that Eddie Matthews was the person that they ultimately went with for the first cover. And the reason I say that is, I'm going to drag this over here. This shows just how fortunate we were, because, okay, we've got the dummy issues, but here's issue number 1 with Eddie Matthews. But look at all the next ones. You've got golf bags. You've got a girl on the beach. You've got a yacht or a sailboat. Golf bag. You got a race car. You got rodeo or whatever, bull. I don't know. You do have a football player. I think is that Calvin Hill? Is that his name? Calvin Jones. I'm sorry. Which not a name that ended up being real relevant. And just going through the line here. Here you got Y.A. Tittle. I think this was issue number 15, but in the first 15 issues of Sports Illustrated, we only have 3 of what I would consider like the major, stadium sports. You got the Matthews, you got this one of, a college football player, Calvin Jones, and then and then number 15 with Y.A. Tittle, and just all these other random covers. It's almost like we lucked out from a collector standpoint that they did go with that shot for the first issue.
It really may have changed psychologically, like the approach here, if that was not the case. If you were to scroll down a little bit, I think maybe people would kind of look at it like, let's kind of ignore the first 20 issues and then we get to the real stuff. It almost still kind of feels that way to me.
Yeah.
I'm a person that really, I love to celebrate, my heroes, right? So like, you know, I want to have items that commemorate like, my favorite players. So, some of those other ones, it's a bit of a stretch. You have to really be into collecting, Sports Illustrated, holistically to really dive into some of those others.
Yeah, and Sports Illustrated got so much better at that as the years went on at actually highlighting the heroes. I mean, really, they actually almost got to a point where they overemphasized that. I think like
Right.
in the 90s, and that was when they started to see a decline in their circulation in the late 90s. But yeah, let's go back a little bit to I was referencing some of the sales on this first issue, and it was only a couple of years ago that. We would see 9.8 copies of this issue sell. I mean, I know that there were even a couple above 10,000, and then it was real common there for a while, like 8,000s, and it just seemed to dip and dip. We saw 6,000, 5,000, 3,000s, and then, like I said a few days ago, 1,800. And so I really want to talk about why that is. I know with these other issues, yeah, collectibles market is down. We talk about first to market being an issue. We talk about there not being a huge number of high end buyers, but this first issue is just so unique in what's going on. And the reason for that, if you are listening to this and you don't understand why, the pop counts on this are huge. This issue has been graded close to 800 times. It is by far, I think, by double the most frequently graded issue of all time. And at first glance that seems really odd. It's like, wow, how is this issue from 1954 so common? And there's really two main reasons why. The first reason why is that the first issue did not have a single copy that would be considered a subscription copy. Even though Sports Illustrated did have a base of subscribers before they sent out that first issue, I believe they were all sent in like a large size envelope, and
Yeah.
none of them had a mailing label on the cover, not a single one.
Right.
So every single remaining copy of this issue number one that's still in existence in the world, if you send it to be graded by CGC, it's going to be considered a newsstand. And to my knowledge, there's not another weekly edition of Sports Illustrated that would be in that same boat. So that's number one. The second reason why it's so huge in the pop counts, and this is also the reason why not only is there a large number of these issues graded, but there's a large number of highly graded copies, is because, as we've talked about before, they saved a bunch of these issues. They saved a bunch of these copies of issue number one, stored them in a warehouse for a while. I mean, I think around a decade, if not more. Eventually, they had to move them around to gain some space, and they ended up selling these copies of issue number one. I know they did some in the 80s. They did more rounds in the 90s. They maybe even had some left over in the early 2000s that they were selling as collector's items, and so people could buy basically these mint condition copies of issue number one, just as recently as maybe 20 years ago. And that's why when you look at the pop reports, not only has there been almost 800 graded, but I think there's nearly 100 9.8s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Gonna just send you a I'm gonna send you a link just to show everybody what those commemorative things look like, or you can just look it up and share it if you want. But yeah, I mean, they're kind of nice. Yeah, here's a little statistic that is kind of interesting. Eddie Matthews' first cover. There were 722 of those submitted and graded by CGC with 93 9.8s. In his second cover, there's 4 graded, and the highest grade is an 8.
That's wild.
You know, JR MD32 in the chat mentioned Andre Laguerre was a guy that really helped SI succeed, right? So, to your point earlier about showcasing stars more, I think that was one of the huge shifts, and also spectator sports in general.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. Andre Laguerre really helped shift them more to focus on the spectator sports and get away from some of the more, trying to target the higher upper class stuff. But what you just mentioned with Brooks, or not Brooks Robinson, Eddie Matthews' second cover being so much more less graded, this is something I want to share. So there's a guy in our Facebook group, I think Jimmy Reynolds, right? Let's see. Yeah, Jimmy Reynolds, man, he's been doing some awesome work, but I just wanted to pull this up to showcase just how unique this first issue is, because what he's done, what Jimmy has done, and he's been compiling all these key first covers all the way back to 54, and he's going through the decades. I think so far he's posted through 79, and so he's listing the dates of the first cover and the sport, and also I love this, he's listing how many copies have been graded as well as what the highest is. But this just shows you issue number 1, there's been 743 newsstand copies, and then the next highest that I can find is you've got 52 from Ted Williams' first cover, you've got 40 on Mantle. And when I keep going through all these other decades, there was only one other first cover from the 50s, 60s, or 70s that even topped 40, and I believe that was Larry Bird all the way in 77. But look at all these big guys. So yeah, Larry Bird has there's only 41 newsstand copies graded of Larry Bird.
That's considered a lot.
Yeah, and that's considered a lot. So that just shows you how staggering and how unique the first issue is with 753. That's crazy. And look at this. Walter Payton, first cover from 76. Only 18 newsstand copies. Huge star.
And unfortunately, supply demand for Eddie Matthews. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not enough demand right now for that huge supply of all of those 9.8s and other highly graded first copies.
I have to admit, as a sports magazine collector, I still yet to pick up that first issue because I feel like I can get it at any time.
So I have a 9.4 copy that I bought. It was actually the very first slab that I bought, so it's been almost 2 years ago now. And my thought was, okay, if I'm really going to get into this hobby and if I'm going to be serious, because I was already at that time kind of planning of making my own YouTube channel and kind of, being a content creator, I was like, I'm a fraud if I don't own a copy of the first cover. So I bought.
What are you trying to say?
No, I'm not saying anything about you. I'm just saying I bought a 9.4 2 years ago for, I want to say, about $700, which to this date is the second most I've spent on a single issue. The only one I spent more on was a Mickey Mantle first cover, which I bought at a 6.5 and then cracked and cleaned and pressed and got it back in an 8.0. So that worked out. But I spent $700 on that 9.4 just because I wanted to have a copy. But now I kind of wish I wouldn't have, because I feel like I probably could get one cheaper. Heck, if I keep waiting and waiting, I may be able to get a 9.8 for less than $1,000 if it keeps going the way it is.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, and Jimmy, who I'm shouting out right here, he's on listening with us live right now. He popped in the chat, and Jimmy, once again, I just want to give you a big shout out for the work that you're doing with all of these spreadsheets and first covers, because this is big time help for people in the hobby.
We go through a couple of those years. Do you have them available?
Yeah, I've got them all right here.
Let's see a couple of these more interesting ones, maybe.
And I do want to mention, so another thing, once again, Eddie Matthews, first cover, 743 copies. An interesting thing here is when you look at 1955, some of these numbers are a lot higher than you would maybe expect, especially compared to the 60s and 70s. When you're looking at a Ted Williams, I mean, once again, wow, 1955, Ted Williams, 52 newsstand copies. Yes, in the grand scheme of things, that's still extremely, extremely low. But compared to all these others, you're like, wow, why is there so many more? I think the reason that you see decent numbers on these 55 issues, 52 copies of Ted Williams, 36 copies of Willie Mays, 27 of Yogi Berra, once again, 40 of Mickey Mantle. But in those first couple of years, even though we talk all the time about how Sports Illustrated was primarily a subscription-based publication, and there are so many more subscription copies out there than there are newsstand. I think the fact of the matter is that those first few years, before Sports Illustrated had really gotten off the ground, there was a higher proportion of newsstands sold than what we would eventually go on to see. We talk a lot about how 3 or 4% was kind of what it settled into, and we know for a fact, based on some data we found, that in the 70s, that only 3 to 4% of the print run was newsstands. But I think that number is a little higher when you're looking at issues from 50, 54, 55, 56. That number may be closer to 10%, could even be 20%. We don't really know for sure, but I think that's why you see a little bit higher number of newsstand copies in the in the 50s compared to 60s and 70s.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. However, we also know that Sports Illustrated really struggled in that first 10-year span.
True.
So the fact that these were kept around or picked up and kept around
True.
is kind of interesting too.
Yeah, they're still rare. There's no doubt about that. I mean, sports card world, 52 Ted Williams rookie cards would be insane. I don't have any clue what it is. I know that Mickey Mantle's rookie, well, not his rookie card, but Mickey Mantle's 52 Topps card, that's the iconic one. Pop counts on that one are 1,500 or so that have been graded.
It's interesting. It's funny that you mentioned that because we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
Yes.
But I actually have some of those numbers up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. But yeah, Mike, like you said, looking at some of these other ones, I mean, heck, look, Sugar Ray Robinson's first cover, 2 newsstand copies graded.
Yeah.
Johnny Unitas, 59, 15 copies graded. And the Heisen 8.0. This one blows my mind. Jack Nicklaus, first cover from 1960, 11 newsstand copies.
Wait, Will Chamberlain has 14. That's it.
What's that? 61. Yeah, Wilt Chamberlain, 14 newsstand copies.
14. That seems wow.
That's wild.
That's a lot more than I thought it would be. Yeah.
I mean, even Muhammad Ali, listed as Cassius Clay from 1963. I think Mike, you and I would both agree that's a top 5, if not top 3 issue of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Only 31 newsstand copies graded.
Right.
So, yeah, thanks again, Jimmy, for putting this together. If you are not already in the CGC Sports Illustrated Facebook group, jump in there, and that's where Jimmy has been sharing these spreadsheets. Okay. Just check in real quick. Oh, another little thing I wanted to mention is also that first issue from SI. It's got sports cards in there as well, which they did that a few times. I know the second issue has it. I know there's an issue. I think the Willie Mays first cover, that issue has some sports cards in there. But there are a handful of Sports Illustrated issues where they actually had sports cards on the inside, and they did that in issue number 1. I know there's a Jackie Robinson card, there's a Willie Mays card, there's a Ted Williams card. So that's kind of another little unique.
However, it is still paper stock.
Is it? It's not.
Right, it's not cardstock, right? I think it's just the regular, like the kind of like the cover of the magazine.
Okay. I mean, I'll be honest. I've never actually opened a first copy. The only first issue I've owned is the one that I got already slabbed. So
Yeah. Another thing that's kind of interesting, I forget which issue it is, but they had the proposed 1954 cards in one of the issues, and they had a Mickey Mantle in there who is not in the 1954 top set because of licensing with Bowman at the time.
yes, that is the second issue, the one with the golf bags.
Right. And it's in black and white, I think, as opposed to color.
All right, let's go on to our third topic. We're going to talk about raw versus graded, and I think we want to touch on this from both a buyer's perspective and a seller's perspective. But Mike, you reached out to me the other day because we noticed some really high sales on some raw ungraded newsstand copies, and that got you and I talking a little bit just in our text conversation about the differences in selling raw versus graded. And so why don't you lead us off on this topic and share some of your thoughts about that?
Or is it right if I get control of the screen here?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. One second, let me throw that to you. Okay, you should have sharing abilities now. Sorry, I should have set that earlier. Zach W mentioned earlier he likes the font used on that first issue of Sports Illustrated, and I agree. It's interesting. Sports Illustrated did go through several changes with their font, and a book that I've mentioned several times, The Franchise. They talk about that. They talk about some of those changes, and sometimes there was a lot of pushback, but all right, Mike, let me get this screen big for you. All right, you're up.
All right, can you guys see my screen now?
Yeah, they can see you.
Is it working? Great. All right, so one of the ones I wanted to mention was Barry Sanders' first cover that recently sold in newsstand raw. So here we could see that in October 12th, it sold for $162 raw for a newsstand. And I think just a couple days later, 2 days later, I believe, a CGC 8 sold for almost exactly the same price. So we've talked about the risks in buying raw magazines that we think are newsstand. In modern magazines, usually it's a little bit safer because usually the mailing label is printed on from, I think it was 92 on. Is that right?
Yeah, 94-ish, I think.
And with the Barry Sanders first cover, primarily that's been the case, that all the mailing labels have been actually typed on to the actual magazine. However, there are instances of that magazine that have an actual mailing sticker. And I think you and I have chatted about this in the past, where the instances that I found of that seem to have ties to Canada. So I'm wondering if there's something to do with distribution there, where the Canadian distribution used the mailing labels and the US distribution printed it on there for some reason. But the bigger point here is the price for a raw magazine that is assumed to be newsstand. And I think this is going towards the psychology now of people wanting to get in at a low price and convert it to a high price. So we've seen this in cards. People all the time would like to, get a card graded if they think it's in good condition, and all of a sudden your $50 investment's worth $300. And that can happen. It can certainly happen. And I think that that's right now the mentality for a lot of people getting into the hobby. And I'm a collector that has always done well with just buying singles. So I was never a big grader guy. I mean, I have graded cards for sure, but I've always looked at my either my collection or my investments as okay, I'm investing in this player now because I believe in this player long term. I'm going to pick up his rookie maybe in a single. I'm going to get a PSA 10 of his rookie. I'm going to put that to the side and let's see what happens in a couple of years. And that has worked very well for me in my whole collecting life, basically. Um, I've found as I've entered the sports magazine collecting that that's kind of bit me in the butt a little bit, I feel, where I probably would have benefited more from playing this game, maybe at least earlier on. But now it's hard to get some of these newsstands, for good prices anymore. There's a lot of sellers that seem to be, we touched on this in the past, selling their newsstand issues for premium costs, uh, sometimes even higher than you would find a graded version of it. Because it's offering the buyer, I think it's offering the buyer, here's your, your treasure find. Now turn it into something. But when you turn it into when you send it to and you get it graded, even if it grades well, it might either be worth the same amount or maybe even a little bit less. Plus, you're going through the risk and you're going through the costs of pressing, cleaning, and grading. So, yeah, it's something to think about for sure. It's really interesting. A couple other um, examples that I was looking into. We know that the Tom Brady natural first cover and newsstand recently sold for quite a bit.
That was the one that really got us talking.
Yeah, but we also mentioned a couple in the last episode that were surprising, like the Carl Yastrzemski first cover raw
Hmm.
newsstand, the Oscar Robertson first cover newsstand went for big money, like
Hmm.
$600. So this seems to be an approach that a lot of people are interested in taking right now.
Yeah,
And
whenever there's a key first cover newsstand copy that looks to be in really good condition, and there's some nice photos posted that make it appear to be in near mint condition. People will bid big money on that, as you can see with that Tom Brady that you've got on the screen.
here's the thing with magazines. There's so many little things that go on inside these magazines, or even on the cover and back, that these pictures are not going to tell you.
Yeah,
These pictures can make it look like, oh, this thing is perfect right off the presses. You get it in hand, you're like, oh, there's this little thing here, there's a little fold there I didn't notice. These magazines have so many intricacies compared to a card, for instance.
it is very risky if you are playing the 9.8 game, where you're strictly buying raw copies looking to hit that 9.8, and you're basing it strictly off pictures. It is risky because, like you said, there are so many flaws that cannot be shown in photos, and you can take your photos and use lighting in a certain way that hides flaws. And as you mentioned, there are flaws on the interior of these magazines that you're not going to see. Now, that's not to say that you can't strike gold, because you can, and lots of people have, and I have. And that is part of what makes it really fun is, getting that lucky find, and, having it grade big and having it pay off. And that potential is definitely there. And I think that that's an important part of this hobby because, like you referenced, the speculation piece in sports cards is a big piece. There's a lot of people out there who are maybe not in the hobby of sports cards for the same reasons as, I would say that you and I are in the hobby of sports magazines. I would consider you and I both to be more collectors first.
Yeah.
But there's a large contingent, especially in the sports card market, that they're there to be a flipper. and they're looking to make that big profit and that big turn. And I think of there was a Jason Dominguez. Especially they like to do it with the prospects. But also same deal. If there's a raw card posted that looks to be a potential PSA 10, people will really bid high on it, and you're seeing that in the sports card market. And honestly, I think I think that's a good thing, because in my opinion, for this hobby to continue to grow and for it to ultimately thrive and for it to hopefully one day, reach somewhere close to the same level of interest that maybe comics or even sports cards has, you have to have all of those different levels and all of those different types of people in the hobby. You have to have the true collectors who just genuinely, are passionate about the covers and love the history. You have to have those the low end buyers who don't have a ton of dispensable income but still really enjoy parts of the hobby. You have to have those high end buyers with deep pockets who are looking for the most prized and the most rare possessions, the pop 1 of 1 9.8s. And then you got to have the flippers. I mean, that's a part of what has really skyrocketed both sports cards and comics into the level that they are, because that's where you sometimes see these highest sales that get a lot of attention, because there are people that are strictly looking to make a flip. And so I think that's what you're seeing a lot of here with some of these really high sales on newsstands. And for me personally, even though that's not me and that's not my game, I think that's a good thing to have those people in the hobby that are playing that role.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I'm a little bit biased when I say this because I do consider myself a collector, like you said first, and somebody that really values like the history of these things. Without the collectors, the flippers are just going to flip to themselves until it's nothing,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll just kind of fade away into never land. So collectors are the end game there.
No, I agree. I agree. I mean, if there aren't people like you and I who are just strictly interested in this, then this doesn't become a hobby at all. And yeah, there's no landscape for flippers. But I had a newsstand copy of a key first cover that I bought for a little over $200 over a year ago. I got it graded, and I sold it recently for $3,000. Is one of the few that I have sold, and I only did it because someone was reaching out to me about it. They were interested in it, and I just felt like, hey, you know what? This is one that maybe this is the best time for me to part with this one. It wasn't an athlete that I was particularly in love with. Definitely a significant cover, but I felt like I could take some of this money from this sale and put it into getting some more magazines that I want. And but that's just an example of how there is an opportunity, to strike gold and find one of these, source one of these raw newsstands and get it graded and make a profit. But like you mentioned, there's major risks, and there's some big time. There's some big time advantages to buying graded. You may be spending more money, but when you buy graded, number one, you've got confidence in knowing if it's newsstand versus subscription. If we're talking about pre-1990, obviously, like you referenced, if it's like 92, 94 on, we already can tell based on whether the label's printed on or if it's a barcode. But if you're talking vintage, that's always a risk when you're buying raw, that you think you may be buying a newsstand only to find out later that it's not. And when I say later, you may not be finding out until you send it into CGC, and by that time it's too late to send it back for a refund. So
Right.
that is a big advantage of buying graded. You already, like Tony said in the chat, you already know what you're getting. You already know that it's a newsstand or subscription. Another huge advantage is you have confidence in the condition. When you've already got a grade assigned to it. When you're buying raw, it's so fun to speculate and be like, oh my gosh, I think this could be a 9.8 or this could be an 8.0 or whatever, but you just don't know from photos. And even if you get it in your hands and you still think, oh yeah, this is a 9.8 or this is an 8.0, you still got to send it to CGC and their graders got to agree with you. So, buying graded, you've got the confidence that it's a newsstand, you've got the confidence in the condition, whereas when you're buying raw, you're really kind of taking a leap on a lot of those things. And like you mentioned, there's also a lot that can go wrong between the moment that you buy that issue raw online all the way to the point where you get that issue back graded from CGC. Man, there's a lot of margin for error there. And I speak from experience on that one because you're hoping that that seller packages that well and gets it to you without any damage from the postal service. You're hoping that you can clean that sucker or pay someone to clean it and not cause any damage. You're hoping that you can get it pressed without causing any damage. You're hoping you can send it to CGC without causing any damage, and then that they grade it and then they send it back to you. Sorry, without any damage. I'm getting too excited over here. There's a lot that can go wrong in that period of time, so it's a catch-22. The risk reward can be high, but there's a lot more safety and confidence in buying something that's already graded.
Those are great points. With the risk reward, like the biggest rewards are usually when you find somebody that could care less about magazines and just came into something, special by accident, and you get this great magazine for nothing, but they don't know it's worth anything, and you're really, you're rolling the dice on how they package it and send it to you. Those are the ones that always kind of scare me a little bit. I always follow up with those sellers. Hey, please package this well between two hard pieces of cardboard. They can think I'm crazy. I don't care. It's worth it. It's definitely worth it.
Because once it's damaged, you can't go back.
Right. Yeah. And they may take it back, or maybe you didn't pay that much for it, but there goes your opportunity. And there goes that issue that made it this whole way until that moment.
And I think that Jimmy made a really good point in the chat just now. He says he's finding a lot of gems in his eBay buys. And, we have touched on how it seems like right now the market has become oversaturated with sellers. Because over the past year, 2 years, I think a lot of interest has grown in this hobby. A lot of people have gone out and gotten these issues graded. And there are a lot of people with that sell first mentality, and they're putting all these slabs on eBay, or on Heritage up for sale. And so what we've started to see, as we've shown, is some of these sale prices are dropping lower. And again, I think it's because there's not enough demand out there yet. The number of buyers out there is not high enough compared to all of these slabs that are put up for sale. And so what Jimmy is saying, and I totally agree with, even though we talk about how it's really hard to find newsstands, and the hunt for newsstands seems to get more difficult and more difficult with each passing month, this is actually, in my opinion, a really great time to go and pick up some of those graded slabs for really cheap, because the market is oversaturated with these slabs for sale, and there's a lot of highly graded newsstand copies of collectible issues that, from what I'm seeing, are going for pretty good prices. And so you may be able to go find some steals right now on some graded issues that you're not going to be able to find in maybe 5 years.
That's true. I want to apologize to everybody for having the stagnant image for so long. This was actually a sale that you and I both commented on today that went for a really hefty price, having already been slabbed. This is a very tough issue, especially at a high grade.
Yeah, I was surprised with this sale. That's a really strong sale.
Yeah.
Not a first cover. I don't even think that's not even Wilt's first Lakers cover. I don't think.
No, I don't think so either. I think there was another one before this.
Beautiful issue though, and yeah, strong grade.
I do think that I am seeing that slabs that are in especially high grade are still they're still selling very well and going for strong prices, because I think that buyers do realize this is not like, not easy to find, even if you do find the raw copy.
No, I agree 100% with that. What I feel like I'm seeing, and this is just anecdotal, I don't have data backing this up, but I feel like I'm seeing a lot of really strong, what I would call mid-range sales. I'm seeing a lot of really strong sales ranging from like $200 to $800. It's the really super high-end stuff that I feel like there's a visible dip in, and once again, I mainly attribute that to the fact that I think that the pool of really high end buyers is still really small compared to sports cards and comics, but it does seem like the bottom line is there's not a lot of us that can afford to be in that upper echelon of spending, but there are a lot more that can afford to be in that mid level, and that's what I'm seeing a lot of, in my opinion. It seems to be that mid range has been really, really strong with a lot of sales that still are pretty significant sales. Like I said, over $200. But I don't know. I've been pretty impressed with a lot of examples like that you just showed with that Wilt Chamberlain or this one with the Bobby Orr.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree.
Pull up that, if you don't mind. Wasn't there a Terry Bradshaw raw newsstand that went for maybe even $1,000 the other day, around the same time as that Brady?
I think so.
I think it was a Terry Bradshaw first cover. There was one seller a few days ago who, yeah, look at that, man, Bradshaw first cover raw, $1,136.
I mean, it does look awesome in that picture.
That's a stunner in the photo, and
It looks nice.
very, very well. I mean,
Also, 1970. This is right around the time that we always talk about condition sensitive, and
yeah,
yeah, it's a tough period, the 60s and early 70s.
it is.
That's a cool cover. Sports Illustrated, like I feel like they're kind of their peak 70s, 80s, and 90s. Would you say? It's kind of like, I don't know. Maybe you could maybe throw 60s in there too, as far as like star covers and that sort of thing. Um,
I think my favorite era would be late '60s and into the '70s. Their peak as far as circulation, I believe, was right around 1991, if I recall from the book that I was reading not too long ago. And it was after that it started dipping a little.
Sure, because like the internet, right? So like the internet comes around like in the mid 90s to late 90s.
Well, yeah, that played a huge factor. But another thing that they talk about a lot in the book, in the franchise, is how Sports Illustrated continued to grow and grow and grow in the '80s, and like I mentioned earlier, they were really focusing on star heavy, really promoting the Michael Jordans and the big time stars, Magic Johnsons. Also, the swimsuit issue was huge in the '80s. I mean, if you want to talk junk wax of the sports magazines, it's the swimsuit issues of the mid to late '80s. Those are what I would consider junk wax because so many of them were purchased off of the newsstands. But what Sports Illustrated was doing was in the late '80s, early '90s, they were running so many promotions, trying to get these new subscribers. Like, hey, subscribe now and you'll get this football phone, or subscribe now you'll get this windbreaker of your favorite team, and hey, we'll also throw in a free swimsuit edition. That's what they were doing. And so what I was reading is their subscriber count kept going up for a few years, like into the early 90s, but their retention rate was getting worse and worse because all these people, they were just getting off of these promotions, and it wasn't true readers who were actually enjoying the journalism and the photography like what SI's strong base had always been, and it bit them in the butt big time, and it really started affecting them negatively going into those early 90s. Like I said, I think 91 was their peak circulation, and then it started dropping off after that.
just sort of strikes me as interesting, and like which athletes have, like, we know Michael Jordan obviously has the most covers with 50. But then you have Muhammad Ali, then Magic Johnson, and then Kareem. I feel like in the 70s, if they didn't have like a big star, they're like, I don't know, just put Kareem on the cover again, because he was on like every other cover in the 70s, basically.
Yeah.
Um, Jack Nicklaus, then Tiger Woods, and then Larry Bird, Shaquille O'Neal, Pete Rose. Mantle's actually down further on the list with only 13 covers.
LeBron and
But
Kobe are up there pretty high now.
yeah, yeah, and LeBron, yeah, for sure. Well, should we move to the last topic?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Okay, I'm going to give you the screen back.
Right. So yeah, we've already we've already touched on this topic a little.
Yeah,
We've talked on the sports cards, but I think since it's such a natural transition, sports cards and sports magazines, and we talk a lot about how the hobby of sports magazines seems to be a mix of sports cards and comics. I thought it might be a good topic to just discuss some of the differences and some of the similarities between the two hobbies of sports magazines and sports cards. So, Mike, I know that you came from the sports card world, similar to myself, and you were, I think, really big into a lot of the vintage and maybe even pre-war stuff. But what are some of the key differences or similarities that you think of and that you see between sports cards and sports magazines?
well, as we were talking about the last topic, actually, this just came to mind. Now when you see a card, certainly a vintage card in high grade, it better be in the slab. If it's not, then it just raises all sorts of flags, right? Like, why is it not graded? Why wouldn't you not grade this if it's in high grade and it's legit? Whereas, magazines, it feels like, at least at the moment, people are still trying to find those treasures, and it's not questioned. I wonder if we will ever get to that point, or I assume we will, but like when we'll get to that point where, like, why is this not graded? And that might be the difference maker from like what we're seeing now with like these high um, raw sales compared to what seems to be kind of stagnant slab sales.
And I do think we'll get closer to that at some point, but I think one difference there is it's probably a lot easier to counterfeit a card than it is to counterfeit a Sports Illustrated magazine.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, that magazine has so much going on. I don't- I wouldn't even know where somebody would start. I mean, I guess they could. I guess they could, but it would just take so much more than putting together just a counterfeit card.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's another big thing that we've mentioned several times is prospecting is such a big thing in cards where um, it always has been and it still definitely is now, where it's not so much of a thing for the magazines. Magazines is definitely more history based, and I think that's why it lends itself to history buffs, and collectors more so than flippers. So, until the hobby shows that it's worth just a flip, I suppose. But I think that's why it lends itself to that aspect and those types of people. Um, yeah. So another big difference is, let's say you're a Mickey Mantle fan or a P or a Yogi Berra fan, and you want to get a bunch of, like, their 50s cards. Maybe you want the whole run. You can go on eBay and make it happen in a night practically if you wanted to. If you had the money, you can just buy them all up and you got yourself a whole collection. It's not that easy with magazines, even ones that are already, graded and in circulation. Um, it's much more difficult. Again, of course, I'm talking newsstand, but even subscription possibly it'd be hard to put that run together. So that's another big difference, the numbers. And then when you talk about actual pop counts of like graded, premium collectibles for these players, then the numbers are just huge, vastly different. So I did pull out a couple here that I wanted to share. We sort of touched on this earlier a little bit. The Mickey Mantle 52 tops and a PSA 8. There's 35 of them, which is low actually, very low for cards. But Mickey Mantle 56 SI, Sports Illustrated, and a CGC 8. There's two, right? And a LeBron James 2003 Topps Chrome PSA 10, which is probably his biggest mainstream card. There's 2264. There's 2,264 of those.
Wow.
And then a LeBron James 2002 CGC 9.8, which in graded magazine world is kind of high, is 44.
I think
But
it's
44
I think it
compared
might
to
be the
22.
second highest behind the first
Well,
issue.
I wonder is the Wembenyama has
Oh
it
yeah, there
cracked?
may be. You're right. There's probably by now some moderns that have passed LeBron's up.
Last I checked, the Wembenyama I think is actually more now.
Okay.
But yeah, yeah. So, but my point is, I mean, we're talking several times, difference here. Um, and this is true across the board. So, during the actual time, like when these things came out, people had the cards and people were getting the magazines. There was still part of the historical landscape, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about collectors maybe oftentimes valuing the history aspect a little bit more. And I think that's a big difference to me with the sports magazines versus the sports cards. The sports cards are just, especially modern sports cards, they're more manufactured. They feel like they're not denoting any specific moment in time. Maybe a handful of them are, depending on what the photo is of the card, but for the most part, they're not. Whereas with the sports magazine, we know the exact date, the exact year, the reason for the cover, and it has its own little niche and its own place in time in history that the sports cards typically don't have. That's by far one of my favorite things about the sports cards. Another big difference that I think of is with sports cards. I think one of the biggest thrills is ripping open a new pack, and
Yeah,
that's just something that flat out doesn't exist with the
right.
sports magazines. I mean, what you're gonna get with the sports magazines. Although I will say that the the whole ripping, even breaking breakers, that whole aspect of sports cards is actually a big piece that started to turn me away,
Yeah,
because it's almost gotten to the point now where for a lot of people sports cards has become more gambling than it is actually collecting. You're looking at all the rates of, oh, this is how often you get a hit in a box, and you got these people going and buying a bunch of boxes, and they're just ripping and ripping and not actually enjoying any of the items that they open. They're just hoping to hit that one, case hit that they can, sell or flip for $1,000 or whatever. And you don't have that with sports magazines. And once again, I mean, even I was getting to the point several years ago where I was constantly just like feeling this urge. I don't want to jump as far to say it addiction, but it could have been that, and it definitely is for some. But to where I just wanted to go to the nearest store and buy a box of cards and just rip it.
it's a real thing, and it is an addiction for a lot of people, actually. And I don't know about you as far as opening up boxes, but I can speak for myself. I've never ended up with more value on the other side of opening up that box than I paid for it. I don't know if I've ever got more. You really have to get that tough hit to really make it worth your while. And even in some of those cases, it's like you're barely making it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty rare. I agree with you. So
And that, yeah, that's really turned me off as well.
I mean, I
I,
was
I I don't want to I don't want to like poo-poo like sports
no.
cards too much. I still do love sports cards, and I still am a sports card collector. But as far as those aspects in particular, Jimmy said something here in the chat that maybe you could try to field. I don't know if I could really talk to it, but he was asking if it was true that some shady people are replacing and stapling poor covers um, back covers with covers that they have created and selling them as newsstands. Do you know anything about that? I actually
Hmm.
don't know anything about that.
Got to be honest that that's the first I've heard of that. You know, not saying that it isn't happening. Definitely could be a possibility. I do know that CGC looks for things like that. You know, they will. It's called marriage, and it's a lot more common in the comic world where someone will try to take one component from one comic and connect it to other components of a different comic of maybe the same issue in an attempt to get a high grade. And if that's detected, then CGC will denote it, and it will get I don't remember what the specific type of label is, but they'll look for that type of stuff, and it's difficult to get if you're messing with staples, if you're removing staples and reattaching staples. I mean, a lot of that stuff is really difficult to do without it being noticeable. And CGC is trained to detect those. One thing I do actually want to clarify, I know in one of our recent episodes I was talking about how I didn't know if CGC has the same people who are grading comics, if they're the same ones who are grading sports magazines. And someone who, with knowledge of that, reached out to me and confirmed that yes, the same people that grade the CGC comics, they are cross-trained to use their same knowledge and skills to grade the Sports Illustrated magazines. And
They,
what I do know is that they're pretty dang good at spotting that stuff in the comics. And so I do think it would be difficult for someone to pull that off with Sports Illustrated and sports magazines, but I mean, definitely not impossible. Thankfully I haven't heard or seen of any instances of it happening, Jimmy, and I hope that's not something that becomes prevalent.
they've got to really want it to make that happen because like those original issues are put together by machines, mass, you know, issues by machines. So for like somebody to take the trouble and really make one happen that actually, you know, looks legit, I would imagine that it's only really worth the while for really some of the highest end and highest collectible issues to even bother trying
Hmm.
it. It just seems like so much trouble compared to like cards where it's so easy just to like get like some like the similar paper stock and you know they can try to make that happen, I suppose. But yeah, for magazines, I have to think that, even if there is instances of that, it has to be much smaller.
Yeah, and Chris clarified in the chat for me that it would be a green qualified label for trying to marry a cover to a magazine. So some I also we talked about some of the ways that sports cards and sports magazines differ, but I wanted to mention some of the ways that it's very similar as well, which I think is why it's kind of a natural transition that attracts some of the same collectors. But obviously, it's a great way to collect your favorite athletes. When I think of my sports card collection, I've got a huge collection of Kobe Bryant cards because he was my favorite athlete growing up. And then same thing with the sports magazines. I mean, I'm trying to basically gather every Kobe Bryant magazine cover that there was. So that's a big part of it. We see a lot of variants, especially going on into the 2000s and on with Sports Illustrateds and some of the other publications. They have different variant covers that came out in a certain week, and I think that's very similar to some of the variations that you see popular with modern sports cards. There's even, we talk about how Slam is starting to do some limited print runs that, serial numbered out of, 94 or however many. That seems to be a play off of what sports cards have made really popular. And then also, I think like the rookie cards and the first covers, total total translation there. That to me, that feels like pretty much the same thing. That when it comes to the most collectible, it's usually going to be that first rookie card or that first time that an athlete was on the cover. And then also, like, if you're looking to get things graded, really grading costs are really similar. Maybe if you're doing vintage Sports Illustrated magazines, I think those are running $37 a piece. So that's a little bit higher. But the modern magazines are $25 a piece. That's not too much different from getting a single modern card graded with PSA or whoever it may be. So there's a lot of similarities, and I think that's why a lot of people like you and I, Mike, we started off as sports card people, and we found our way into this hobby because there's just components of it that are really similar that we love about both of them.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned you're trying to get all the Kobe Bryant ones. Good luck getting all the Kobe Bryant cards or even all of his rookies.
Yeah, I actually started at one point trying to make a checklist, and it got overwhelming, and I couldn't even get close to it.
It's kind of a futile venture for almost any modern player. I'm a LeBron guy. He's got a million different rookie cards. It's like, I can either make this a life's mission for me, or I can just stick with my favorites. So if I want to get all of LeBron's SI covers, that's maybe more doable. So
Yep, for sure.
all right, well, should we call this an episode?
I think so. I feel pretty good. I think we had four strong topics to talk about tonight, and of course, as often happens, we rambled and went a little long.
Yeah, and we had some great interjections from the chat as well.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for chiming in on the chat, and those who have tuned in to join us live, and also to anyone who's listening to this after the fact as well. We really appreciate everybody participating.
Yeah, and if you feel like listening to this again while you're working out or going to work, this will be on podcast audio as well.
And would love to get some more topic suggestions. So if you have any topics that you would like for Mike and I to discuss, please leave it in the comments in this video, and we'll definitely try and add it to our line for discussion in an upcoming episode. So, all right. Thanks again, Mike. Appreciate it. Had a good time. And everybody will do